Okay, welcome back. This is Stephen J. Holiday, founder and presenter of IDM Ministries and Associations, where every day is a little more like heaven than the day before. Well, if you're joining us, you're probably in the middle of the Be Still series. Um, there is a link on our website if you'd like to order a copy so that you can follow along, but you don't need it. You can just follow along by watching the videos. We're on section 4. Section 4, there are no page numbers, but I just break up the lessons into sections. And section 4 has to do with fivefold ministry. So if you were to jump into, let's just jump right in. If you were to jump into kind of the theology of what the Christian faith is based on, you could probably do pretty good looking at two chapters in the Bible that happen to be just back to back. Um, in some of the underground churches where prisoners are put in chains for their faith, they'll actually tear a page or two out of the Bible and pass them through, hidden in different places in their food or in a crack in a wall or something. If you were to tear one of those pages out or two, and you absolutely had to choose, I you could do worse. I mean, I would definitely consider taking John chapter 3 and John chapter 4. If you had to sum up everything that I believe Jesus stands for, if you had to, that would be a good place to start. And John even says if we were to write everything that Jesus taught us, Jesus did, it would take all the books in the world. Um, so you're never going to get a full picture, even if you read the Bible cover to cover. There's much, much more to God than what he was able to place in those 66 books. Anyway, we're going to look at John chapter 4, which is a story about Jesus encountering a woman at a well. And in our culture, that doesn't seem like all that big a deal, but in that culture, for a Jewish rabbi to sit and talk with a woman would have been unspeakable. On top of that, if he were to sit down with any Samaritan, uh, the Jews and the Samaritans were in some ways almost like cousins. They had a lot in common, and yet they despised one another. Uh, and so this in John chapter 3, we have the story of Nicodemus. We kind of touched on that already. And then in John chapter 4, uh, Jesus spends some time with the woman at the well. So if you aren't already familiar, and most people really are, but if you aren't familiar with John chapter 4, why not take a minute and read through it? Just pause it and read the story. It may be familiar to you once you start to read it, or maybe you've never heard it before. It's worth going into. So anyway, I have on the note that Ephesians chapter 4, verse 9, and there's tons of stuff I could go into on John chapter 4, but I want to look specifically at what is touched on in Ephesians 4, verse 9, where the writer actually lines out the 5 different gifts. Now, these are not necessarily gifts that the individual is gifted in, but the individual himself or herself uh, is a gift to the community, to the church. And then I want to touch on that. What do we mean when we say the church? We're not talking about my church or your church or the church down the street. We're talking about the church. And this word is found in Matthew 16, where Jesus says to Peter, Peter has this inclination. He has an answer to a question that Jesus is asking. And Peter says, well, Jesus is asking, what do people say that I am? And the disciples, they say, well, some people say you're this, and some people say you're that. And they all had a touch of what was prophetically true. Um, but Jesus was still hoping for more. And finally, Peter says, you're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, Peter, you didn't come up with that on your own. That was a God word. You picked that out of in your spirit, man. You were picking up what God was speaking to you. And he says, Peter, from this point on, you're going to be called the rock, Petros, and upon this rock I will build my church. Now, when he said, I will build my church, the actual translation of that is ecclesia. Now, a Jewish rabbi could have decided to build his own synagogue. A Jewish rabbi could have decided to build his own, like a new version of a Jewish temple. People were ready to stone him when he said, tear down this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. Jesus did come to build temples made of people, not of stone. But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus didn't say, I will build up my own Roman cathedral, one of these Roman edifices, these grand locations built for the honoring of one of their gods or goddesses from their multitude of gods that they respected and worshiped. But Jesus didn't say that. He said, upon this rock, this concept that Peter had stumbled into, I'm going to build my ecclesia, my church. Ecclesia was actually a term that referred to an assembly, and it was more of a governmental authority than a religious one. It could be a religious meeting, a meeting of some sort of spiritual restoration or something, but an ecclesia could have also been a grouping, a meeting of people just discussing and uh, coming to a conclusion on some civic matter. That was the ecclesia. Okay, so Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church. Now, the thing that I get kind of excited about in this lesson number 4 is that I see Jesus functioning in perfect harmony, all 5 of those giftings taking place within his ministry. And it's important that as you listen to this study, you start to ask yourself, where do I fit into this puzzle? Because I believe every person, and this is a little controversial, but I believe every person, even those who haven't yet become Christian, lean in one of these 5 personality types or lean in one of these 5 gifting types. So maybe as I discuss this, you say, wow, I see myself in that. And again, we don't choose which of these 5 to focus on. We just see ourselves more in one of the 5, or in some cases 2 of the 5. And in all 5, we are to function as healthy Christians. We are to function prophetically. We are to function as evangelists. We are to function as a pastor to our neighborhood or our place of business or wherever we are. So we touch into all 5. But anyway, let's take a look. I have a couple of bullets here. I see Jesus as the apostle, in that he says to, I see the apostle in this statement when he says to the woman at the well, I want you to bring me your husband. And she says, well, I'm actually not married. Well, then I see the prophet come out because he says, you actually said that correct because you've been married several times. And in fact, the one you're living with now really isn't your actual husband. Wow, I see you're a prophet, which is one of the no-duh statements of the entire Bible. Yeah, you're right. And so he's functioning as an apostle because an apostle is constantly trying to draw in new people. Doesn't matter if they're saved or not saved. It doesn't matter if they're walking with completely with the Lord. He obviously doesn't want to bring, people who are just plain out living in sin onto his team. But the apostle seems to find a way to bring everybody together. He will never, or she will never, waste a talent. And then the prophet somehow just knows things that he or she ought not to know. And in this case, we see Jesus saying, bring me your husband. Well, I actually am not married. Yeah, that's true. You're actually living with a guy, but you've been married a bunch of times, but the guy you're living with now really isn't your husband. That's the prophetic. And then we see Jesus the evangelist. He says to his associates, his disciples, look at the harvest. It's so ready to go. Look at the harvest. It is so ready to go. And there are no laborers. There are no and And the disciples were kind of beside themselves, because here he is talking to a woman, talking to a Samaritan. Now he wants to talk to more Samaritans, and these Jewish disciples are just beside themselves. And then Jesus says, but look at the people. They are so ready. They're so willing. That's the evangelist's heart. Every place he looks, every place she looks, there are people just waiting to become believers. And then there's the pastor. The pastor's heart says to the woman, you know, I appreciate you getting me this cup of water, but if you knew who I was, if you knew what I carry, if you knew who I worked for, you'd be asking me for a drink of water. That's the pastor's heart, constantly trying to serve, to nourish, to refresh those in the world that are not holding their own. And that's the pastor's heart right there. That Jesus says, you know what, I'm going to stop everything I'm doing, and I'm going to offer you a drink. And the woman says, you're going to dig a well for me, because this is our, and she goes religion on him. This is the well that our father Jacob dug, and all. And Jesus says, you know what, I can give you water that you'll never thirst again. And the woman jumps at that. Show me this water. If I can stop coming here, if I can stop coming to this community, if I can stop being in this life that I've chosen, um, let me have that. That'd be great. That's the pastor's heart. Let me give you a drink of water. And then the teacher, he says to her, because she's getting all this excitement about, well, you Jews say that we're supposed to worship here, but we say this, and our father Jacob this and that. Jesus says, you know what? You worship what you don't know. We Jews, we worship what we do know. But the day is coming when we're going to worship in spirit and in truth. Man, that's the part that's so exciting to me, is that, one day Jesus is saying to her, one day we're going to have a place where it's not going to matter what stripe or label you carry. None of that really counts. What really counts is that we're worshiping Jesus in spirit and in truth. Some people say, does that mean spirit isn't truth? I think what truth means is that we're going to worship him in a God-fearing way, in a spiritual way, in a I don't know, in like a spirit-filled capacity, but we're also going to worship him in truth. In other words, what you can actually put your feet on. The table that you're sitting on, the table that you're sitting next to, the chair that you're sitting on, the ground you're walking on. Those are things that are solid. And Jesus is telling her, we're going to worship God not just in a holy, spiritual, reverential way, and that's certainly valid, but we're going to worship him in truth. We're going to worship him in the way we work. We're going to worship him in the way we do things. We're going to worship him in the way we place our daily tasks. We're going to worship him in the way we raise our families. We're going to worship him in the way we keep our lawn, just every little piece in spirit and in truth. So that's the fivefold ministry that I see, and it kind of lined out in Jesus's ministry right there. I hope you're getting something out of this, and maybe prayerfully asking the Lord where you see yourself fitting in that fivefold ministry, because that's one of the biggest missions of IDM, is to see people making every day a little more like heaven than the day before. And part of that is you have to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. And a lot of people I meet really do genuinely love God. But then the next is you have to love your neighbor as yourself. And people say, well, I try to love my neighbor, but it's hard. It's only hard because you don't know who you are. Once you know who you are and what you were committed to this earth to be and who to be, it's so easy to love the way you were designed to love. Because not everybody is designed to go, into the the bush of Africa, or into the prisons of China. Some of us were designed just to share a kind word with the gal that's checking you out at the grocery store, or the kid who's working his tail off collecting grocery carts in 110-degree weather. That may be your assignment, and 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 that's the place where you can be good at that assignment without having to stress yourself out comparing yourself to other people. So anyway, I hope you're getting something out of this. If you have questions or thoughts, don't hesitate to drop us a line. We're on Facebook. We've got the website with a couple of different ways to get in touch. So please don't be a stranger. Thanks so much for joining us. Hope you're having a great day and enjoying this series. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks again. Bye now.